We are so excited to have Krista Moser with us today on Quilt Street. She is a leading designer in the quilting industry and is known for her innovation and her beautiful quilts, her extraordinary teaching ability. And now we're excited she's going to be doing videos with us and doing some teaching on Quilt Street. So we're excited. Welcome, Krista.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad. Okay, so I have to ask this question. Everybody has to ask the question. When did you start quilting?
So I like to say that I came to quilting late in life because I was almost 12.
Oh gosh, yeah, you're way behind.
But the thing is I'd already been sewing for like 4 years at that point. So I started in garments, and I started in garments at 8 years old. And I love garments. I still do a lot of garments. I love garments. I make them for myself mostly, but that was really where I started. My first passion was, and I did hundreds of garments a year. So like, that's not an exaggeration. So as an 8-year-old, I was put into a sewing class because I'm dyslexic and couldn't read. And so really struggled in school, and my parents recognized what was going on. My dad, actually, he's the one that really picked up on it first because he's also dyslexic. And so he recognized what I was doing as the same thing he has done it as a kid. And he told my mom, he said, "Oh, she's like me." And so he's an architect, right? So, think about like the mindset of like, yeah, very spatially oriented, creativity comes natural. But he said, we need to get her into something creative because she's just going to feel like a failure as long as she's in this very sort of, in the box academic world. And so my mom thought, all right, something creative. My mom doesn't sew. She was terrified of the sewing machine, but she opens the community newspaper and she saw like they had kids classes for all kinds of stuff, pottery lessons, painting classes, and a kid's sewing class. And I actually did all of them. I did the pottery lessons and I did the painting class. I liked them all. I loved them all. But then it was the sewing. I was just like, this is the thing. I mean, day one, sewing machine under my arm, didn't even know if it really worked, packed it into class. And my instructor was exceedingly patient, and I just was like, yeah, this is, I mean, I flew out of that class after having spent an hour and a half sewing straight lines through paper, because that's what they have kids do, and, turn the flywheel to pivot. And I learned all that, in the first class, and I just thought, this is the coolest thing I've ever done. And if you think about it, a little kid is using a power tool. That's a pretty cool thing, and so, yeah, a little gutsy.
Good to see you sitting there, Miss Sparkplug, in the class on this amazing machine.
I was just like hopping out of that class, just like I was so excited. I mean, the possibilities are endless. I could stitch anything together and it would stay put. I was like, so for 4 years. Yeah, for 4 years, I did garments, and I sewed garments for all my siblings. I've got a big family, so I'm one of 7, 3 older siblings, 3 younger siblings. I'm right smack in the middle. And so I like to say that I have plenty of victims to wear the creations that I would make.
Love it.
And I would make the most horrendous outfits, and they would wear them. So it was, yeah. And then at 12 years old, the little fabric store that was teaching me how to sew in town started to turn into a quilt shop. So that's actually how I got exposed to quilting, because, they started to turn into a quilt shop. So they were making more and more quilt samples, hanging them in the store. And I was in there all the time. I mean, they saw me week in and week out, and sometimes, multiple times a week. And so they just said, hey, would you like to make some samples for the store? And I thought, sure, like, how hard could that be? And so I did my first quilting project at 12, and I still do garments, but quilting is like a puzzle. And and then, I mean, it's just, I really, yeah, quilting definitely became my focus after that.
Who's your greatest inspiration in your quilting journey?
That's tough, because I've never been one for social media or sort of any side of any kind of outside exposure. And so I was like, when I started quilting, as a kid, you had Eleanor Burns, and you had, the classics, right? And so those were the people that I really saw their stuff early on. And then we started to see modern quilting become a thing. But I'd spent so much time, being dyslexic, I couldn't read. And so I'd spent so much time just sort of winging it and making up my own designs, even in garments. And then of course in quilting, that it didn't really cross my mind to explore who was out there doing things, because I couldn't read their patterns anyway, and so,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. And so in a way, I would glean from sort of pictures or, seeing what other people, but I couldn't tell you who these people were. I wasn't following names. When I started actually pattern designing, it's kind of embarrassing. I didn't know who was who. I didn't know, I knew the major like fabric brands, Moda, but I couldn't tell you other designers. I'm much better now, but they're early on. So I don't know. I would almost say, having a dad who's an architect, and my youngest brother is also an architect, so I'd almost say that my design inspiration mostly comes from the world of architecture, just because that's what I was really exposed to. And they do kind of go together. So design elements and structure and shape and symmetry and all the things that I work with in the quilting world, I would say probably came out of the world of architecture more than quilting. So.
Well, when you teach, I know that you at some point went into teaching, and when was that in your journey?
So it was almost right away. This is a big part of the story. Here I was 12 years old. Now this shop had started, having me make some samples for the store. And but the thing was, I never read garment patterns, much less, followed other instructions. So now I have all these quilting patterns, and I'm supposed to follow them. And I could read by this point, but it didn't really cross my mind to follow the pattern, So I thought, well, most of this is a suggestion, right? Like, so I was taking these quilt patterns and just changing them wildly all the time. And I would take, the basic idea and really turn it on its head, and doing so many different things with that pattern, straying, sometimes pretty far from the original pattern. And so they would hang these samples in the store, and people would come in, and he would say, oh, I love that. I want to make that. And where's the pattern? Well, they say, here's the pattern. Well, sure, whatever. They're like, that is not the same thing. And so almost immediately they said, Krista, this is so easy for you to do this part, like to just change it like this. But other people want to know how you're doing that. And so would you teach little, tutorials? Like we could do Saturday morning demo session, and you could come in and show people how you got from point A to point B. And I thought, sure. So I was like 12, 13, 14 when I started doing that, making samples, changing them, and then teaching how I had changed them. And that almost immediately evolved into evening classes where they would actually pack their sewing machine into the shop, and we would do an evenings, it's like 6 to 9 p.m. kind of thing. And they would work through the process right there. I couldn't even drive. I was like 14 years old, 15 years old. I couldn't even drive. And I'm teaching evening classes, to groups of people that would come in. I loved it. I thought this is great. I'm doing what I enjoy doing, and they're getting a lot out of it. And my parents were exhausted because my teaching schedule became a very big deal. And they were like, you have got to learn the bus schedule, Krista, because we can't get you there.
Oh, that's hilarious. I think they were thrilled when you learned to drive.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, when I could drive, they were like, oh, thank God, she's on her own. So it was really fast. Right from the start, which I loved to be able to teach and share, how to do these things. That came so natural for me, and the students loved it too. But pretty quickly, they were saying, you have got to rewrite this pattern. The way you're doing this process is so much easier than the way the pattern shows it. You have got to rewrite this pattern. And I just thought, there's no way, if you know anything about dyslexia, you struggle with that end of things, like creativity, science, math, no problem. That comes, but the language, grammar, I thought there's no way I'm going to write anything down. That's just not a skill I have. And so I would just tell the students, like for 20 years, I pretty much just told the students, you're going to have to write your own notes because I'm never going to write anything down for you. So they would come to class. We would work through a whole process. I was coming up with original designs and doing something wild and different. And they would just bring their notepad and a camera and take pictures of the process and write their little notes about measurements and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, and I just thought that was going to be the way it was forever. I'm just going to teach that way. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Right.
When did you start writing your own instructions? Or did you have surely someone assistant that would help?
You know, as a quilter, it's kind of important that you write them yourself. And that was my big hang up. I just thought, oh my gosh, you know, to actually like do that process just seemed like an insurmountable mountain. And so it was in 2016, late 2016, and a couple of friends came to me, and over the years, multiple people had kind of said, hey, I'll help you, you know, this would be, and it just never really seemed to work out. So, but finally in 2016, a couple of friends who are not quilters at all, no experience in the quilting industry, no idea what they were getting into, which is the world, because they had no idea. They said, hey, you know, like, she said, I will, if you can write the instructions as quilters do in their language, you know, that makes sense to quilters. She said, I will make sure that they're like legible and grammatically correct. And these are huge hurdles, you know, in my mind. I'm like, okay, good, you know, that's great. And then her husband, he does graphics illustrations. And he said, if you take pictures of the process, you know, I will turn them into illustrations and then you can write the content, you know, around the illustrations. And I thought, this is perfect. That's all we need. Quilters are visual. We need really clear illustrations, and I can write simple instructions, you know, it doesn't have to be involved. And so that's where we started. It was late 2016, early 2017, put out the first pattern. And within 6 months, you know, I had been teaching for like 20 years. And so I had all these ideas from, you know, that many years of teaching that had never been produced. And so within the first 6 months, we had like 6 patterns out, and they really took off fast. And I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect that. And so I was very, you know, like, whoa. Okay. So now, what are we, 6 years in? And I think it's tipping over the 40 something pattern mark now. I know I've lost track. And you know what? It's like weeds. I pull an idea. I think, okay, it's done. Maybe the creative well will dry up. No, they just grow. I have more ideas than time to do them. And so it's been super rewarding. I really love it.
That is great.
Yeah.
What was your first pattern?
What was my first pattern? I think it was Hollow Star. Hollow Star. It's hard to say because there were like 6 that came out within weeks of each other. It was like, I want to say Hollow Star, Aztec Diamonds, Honeycomb Hexagon, Argyle Lad. I know I'm missing one. Champagne and Pearls. Maybe those are the first 6. Yeah. So they're all kind of.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You have a favorite quilt?
Every time somebody asks me, it's like asking what your favorite child is. And I'm like, probably the latest one that I've done. It's like, you know, the most fresh. I have ones that I love to teach because they're awesome teaching opportunities and everybody has great success. And so those become kind of favorites just because they're really a joy to teach. But the one that is not out yet, it will be probably out by the time this interview airs, is absolutely delightful. And so of course it's the latest one I've done and I'm in love with it. And so that would be my favorite. It's called Flutterby Frolic.
Oh, sounds fun.
It does involve butterflies and flowers. So it's very cute.
Now, do you design fabric or do you use fabric from other places?
Yeah, I use fabric from all designers. So I've not designed any fabric of my own, and I've been approached over the years to maybe do that, but I like to do stuff that reads pretty solid or is in the basics kind of category. And so if I were to design something, it would probably be in that kind of a line. But I love using what other people have done. And every time I see somebody's new awesome fabric collection that I'm like, ooh, I've got an idea for that. It's like a perfect mesh. You know, it's a good marriage, right? So I feel like I can come up with a design element that shows off their fabric, and they've designed that fabric, probably not even having me in mind, but hey, I take it and run with it. And I've done that with quite a few different fabric lines and or collections that I've kind of curated myself. So every quilt that I design has its own personality. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience of kind of putting something together, but it's like every quilt has its own personality. And from the time I'm drafting it in my little sketchbook, I have this picture in my head of what, what it's going to be, what room it's going to be in, or what kind of a theme or a style it's going to kind of embody. And so I go, to the fabric store or to pick fabric from a collection based on what I have kind of, from the very beginning in my head. So the fact that I can just use anybody's fabric is pretty great, because
it really is. It really is. Do you have a favorite technique that you like to teach or design for?
Everything I design is with a 60-degree angle. So if you think about that, it's a lot of popular shapes right now. It's diamonds and triangles, equilateral triangles, so all sides are the same. Diamonds, hexagons, trapezoids, parallelograms, all with a 60-degree angle. And you can get a million different combinations of shapes and really creative designs just by combining what is really kind of a basic element. But because I consistently use a 60-degree angle, I think people, they resonate with, there's a lot of symmetry involved. And so that becomes really kind of a comforting, almost familiar, like, aha, I know what I'm looking at. And as a designer, it actually helps me rein it in a little bit, because I'm a little like, okay, I have to be in a 60-degree angle. You can't go too crazy, right? So, so I definitely, like the one I said that's coming out, it has butterflies. So how do you create, and some of my patterns, like one of them has bumblebees. I have one that's called Totally the Turtle, and it's a great big sea turtle. So that's a lot cute. It's cute too. And a lot of things that I do are simple stars, like the one behind me. But then I use those same shapes to create other shapes, right? Like a sea turtle. And so people just, really seem to enjoy that. So 60-degree angle, the possibilities are endless.
Now, have you designed rulers?
Yep. So
as you had
early on, I'll tell you, so early on, I was doing this whole process, like I said, and putting out, those first 6 patterns or so, and using the 60-degree angle. That was actually at the prompting of my youngest brother, who's an architect. He recognized what I was doing, sort of intuitively, I suppose, with design. And he just said, you know what you're doing? He called it out as some kind of an architectural concept or technique. And I went, like, I had no idea. I'm running with it. So make it your thing was basically, if you've done this much so far with the 60-degree angle, just make it your thing, own it. And I thought, all right, that sounds like a plan. So I started designing everything around these shapes, and Creative Grids contacted me actually within the first 6 months or so. So they're a fabulous ruler company that has a built-in grip on the backside. And I was using their triangle ruler for a good portion of my early projects, and they loved them. And so they were starting to see how popular these patterns were, and that it was, using their ruler, the triangle ruler, but then I was using somebody else's ruler that was a diamond shape because they didn't have a diamond shape. And so they just contacted me one day and said, would you like to design our next ruler? And I just thought, like, like everything has been like that. So I said, what does it take? You bet. Let's do it. So at that point, I'd been teaching for so many years. And when you're in a classroom with students that are using especially specialty rulers, some of them are not easy to understand. And some of them can be very frustrating, or they seem like they're mismarked. So I kind of already knew what I didn't want to do in a ruler, because that would be confusing to my students. And but I thought, all right, for a concept that would be like a one-stop shop, all those shapes I mentioned in one ruler, how cool to be able to, provide somebody a tool and then provide them sort of endless possibilities of what they can do with it. So right from the start, we did the 60-degree diamond ruler in 2018, and it's an 8.5-inch diamond. It's pretty good size. I don't have one sitting right here. I would show you. but it does all of those shapes. So it's a whole diamond, and then half of it gets you a triangle, and right through the middle gets you a hexagon, and in multiple sizes. So, and then trapezoids and parallelograms can be done using the different angles, and it cuts everything from 1.5 to 8.5 inches in all of those different shapes. So that's pretty useful, because now you don't need any, you can do pretty much anything with it. So we did that one in 2018. And then they were asking for a mini version. Lots of people like smaller rulers for smaller projects. And I thought, well, I'm not a gadget girl, right? So I'm like, well, nobody needs it. This one does everything. Well, then we put out the mini version in a 4.5-inch size. And I got to tell you, it's my favorite one to use. So it turns out I am a gadget girl.
What is your biggest challenge that you've ever faced being in business? Because you've been in business a while now. And well, what's been your biggest challenge?
Early on, when you start in business, like, you have different phases, and I'm exceedingly comfortable with the creative side of things, right? Not so comfortable with the administrative, and the sort of like cross the T's and dot the I's. And so that's a struggle if you're, especially with something like, dyslexia, that kind of complicates things. So early on, keeping it really simple, and just doing, I started out as teaching, obviously, and then I got a long arm in high school, and I've been a long arm quilter. Yeah. So everything happened really early, Phyllis.
Where did you put this long arm when you were in high school in your mother and daddy's house?
Yeah, no kidding. No, actually, in high school, I was working on somebody else's long arm. That's how I got introduced to long arm quilting. So I was domestic quilting on my sewing machine, and this gal had a long arm in her house, and she couldn't physically do it as much as she wanted to. So she saw the skills that I had and said, would you, take over some of my clientele and start long arm quilting on my machine? So I would go to her house and work, and long arm quilt. And then that evolved into getting my own, closing in the garage with drywall and insulation. I'm in the Seattle area, so we have cold, wet winters. So yeah, and then stuffing this long arm that showed up in boxes at the end of my driveway, needing to be assembled. I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I thought, what have I done? And back then, you had to do all the maintenance yourself. We didn't have maintenance people here, there, or dealerships that would send somebody out, so if something went wrong, you got to figure it out. And so so I've had all these phases of business, like you become the tech person for, the mechanical end of, like, you become, and then learning, just, business relationships with different people. It's all evolved over the years now with, and now I have help. Thank God. Now I have help with the administrative side of things and everything that I'm not naturally good at, and would struggle. If you sent me an email, I would probably leave it in my inbox for a week before reading it. I'm just, I'm hopeless
That
like that. So what's that?
That explains everything.
Yeah, it does.
I waited.
Waited. Yeah.
No, it's really true though. I totally understand that. Creative people are fascinating because their mind is always creating.
Right.
And to pull them to a business type decision or procedures, it's like you just shot them with, shut all the air out of them. They're just like a little limp balloon.
Because our brains are going in all directions at once. And being dyslexic, that's another part of it too, is your brain isn't super linear. All the options are on the table all the time. I don't know how else to describe it, and so in a way that makes you really good at design and creativity, because all the options are on the table all the time. But you get into a business situation and you're presented with something and it's like so many options. Meanwhile, they're probably not thinking there's so many options, but in your mind, whoa, like
Absolutely. I totally get that.
yeah.
Love the most about what you do. What is your favorite thing to do?
I have been asked this question before, and it's so funny because the whole process, the whole creative process, I would say I love every portion of it, but it's almost like a treasure hunt. Like I I love to pick my fabric and create a color scheme and a color palette. I love that. But as soon as I've done that, I can hardly wait to get it cut and start piecing, because I just want to see it to the next state. I want to see what it looks like. You know, it's like I said, it's a treasure hunt. And so once I'm into the piecing process, I can hardly wait to get it done piecing, because now I want to see it when it's quilted and, you know, have it all quilted up, and I'm done quilting it. And it's like, let's get the binding on this and the sleeve, and let's get it out for photography. I want to see what it, so it's funny, every single part of the process I love, but once I'm into that part, I am anxious to see it done, because I'm like, I can't wait for the next thing, because it's sort of like revealing, you know, something's being literally created before your eyes. And so in a way, it's really exciting process, the whole thing. Of course, my least favorite is actually writing the pattern.
No.
Because once I'm at that point, I've seen the whole thing done,
Yes.
and I'm like, oh gosh, now the work begins. So yeah.
Well, that is wonderful. I met Krista a few weeks ago. She was teaching here in Birmingham, and my friend Carol Brightville texted me and said, "Get over here quickly. There is someone you must meet." And so I said, "Okay." So I hopped up and started over there, and then I was at the wrong church. There were two very similar named churches in Birmingham. I was trying to get there so fast I didn't really pick up on the real name. But anyway, I got there, and when I walked down the hall, I heard this just laughter, unbelievable. And I thought, I'm in the wrong class here. And I opened the door. It was Krista's class of quilters, and they were having a ball. And I watched her teach, and I watched them gather around, and I, could look through the little holes of people. And we didn't get to visit that day, which of course I knew we would, because she was teaching, and that's a top priority with her, is attention to her students. But it was so funny when I met her, we just clicked. And I thought, this is going to be fun. And when we were talking of Quilt Street, I was telling our staff, I've met the most wonderful teacher, designer, quilter, you name it. And so Krista's going to work with us some in Quilt Street, and I'm so excited. And it's just a gift, is what I say. You're a gift from God to us, because you're young, you're vivacious, and you have that look that's not only classic, but it's modern. It's wonderful, and it's easy, made to look hard. That's what I like. And as I watched you teach, I thought, this is exactly what we need. And so we're grateful. We really are. We're so grateful at our company, Hoffman Media. And when we thought this up, I didn't know Krista, didn't know what this new Quilt Street was meant to be, and here she is. But I'd like to close with you just talking and giving just a few pointers to quilters today. Encourage them, and that would mean a lot.
To encourage them, is that what you said?
Yeah, you always encourage people. For
sure. I think probably the biggest encouragement to quilters today is take your time, because there's so much to enjoy about the process. And there are so many sort of quick, down and dirty, get this pattern done fast, but there's so much to enjoy about the process. And if you take your time and enjoy, pressing out your fabric and then cutting, and then, piecing your blocks and doing a nice pressing job as you're doing that, you're going to get the best results. And this is something that I teach in my classes often, is you've got, in a room full of people, or this is true amongst other quilters too, there's sort of let's hurry up and, and you don't want to be the one that's far behind. Don't worry about it. Just take your time, because if you got one concept or one block done and the results were better than you had seen in your previous work, that's a win. So you can take something like that and you can replicate it over and over in the quietness of your own home, or working on your project at a retreat with friends. And you're going to become a better quilter. You're going to be more pleased with your results, less frustrated, more excited about doing another one. I would just say, the biggest thing is enjoy the process, and don't be afraid to just take your time.
Those are great words of wisdom. And I thank you so much for your time today. I know that our Quilt Street members will see a lot of you on Quilt Street, and we're excited that. But thank you so much for sharing from your heart today. You've encouraged me, and I know a lot of people as well.
Oh, that's so great. Thank you so much for having me, Phyllis, and I will see you guys all very soon.
That's great.